What's up, guys? This is Mr. Dunn, and for today's review of Chapter 8, Part 1, Securing the Republic 1791 to 1815, you will be doing this independently, just to allow any, test takers who missed the test yesterday to take their test, or to just kind of allow Mr. Dunn to get some grading done. So for you to get credit for today's assignment, all you need to do is follow along and answer the questions to the best of your capabilities throughout the lecture. Our big topics for today are Alexander Hamilton's financial plan, the French Revolution, the issues that the United States still had with the British after the American Revolution, this continuing political debate between the two factions or political parties now, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, who have now become the Democratic Republicans, John Adams's presidency, our second president, and what was considered the Revolution of 1800. Our big essential question for today is, how did leading Americans address regional differences to develop a federal government? That is still a continuing essential question for us, and it will be, these regional differences being a major concern for our country as we move all the way through the Civil War. All right, so Alexander Hamilton, remember, he's a Federalist, and we need to remember those characteristics for the Federalists and now the Democratic Republicans. And so the Federalists, remember, they are the money guys. Alexander Hamilton is a money guy, so he comes up with the financial plan. And his goal of this plan was to bring financial stability to the United States. Like, ultimately, the goal is to make the United States a modern world power so that we could compete with the likes of Great Britain and France and Spain and all of these major, global players that had colonized in the Americas and that had colonies in other places around the world. And to do that, there was this sense that maybe the government should support big businesses in a way. And there was also this belief that the United States needed to become a major commercial and military power to kind of facilitate its goals of being a strong country. Now, one way to do that was for the government to purchase bonds that had been given out or sold during the war, to purchase those bonds back. So there was a lot of bonds in circulation. A lot of people had invested in the government, and then those bonds had been resold. We'll talk about that a little bit, but Alexander Hamilton wanted to repurchase those. He also wanted the federal government to take all of the debt from the Revolutionary War from the states so that the states weren't burdened with that, and so that we could kind of move forward away from from just the debt from the war. And how would we pay for that? It would be paid from the interest from the bonds that we had, now collected. And it would also give wealthy men a stake in government. There was a sense that people would only really care about the government that they're a part of if they're really invested in it. And the people who could invest the most would have been the wealthy. So that would have been the reason to purchase up all those bonds and to assume the debt from the state governments. Another big idea of his was to create a Bank of the United States to serve as the nation's major financial agent, or just to serve as the country's purse, essentially. Like, imagine if, our country today didn't have a Federal Reserve to kind of manage the money for our government, or to print money, or to give out loans to big businesses, or to just pay, have a resource to pay for wars. It would just get really out of hand. And so we didn't have a Bank of the United States at the time. And so this bank, though, would be a private corporation, which is kind of messy, rather than a part of the government, to hold public funds, to issue banknotes and to make loans, and the profit would go to certain stockholders. Now, again, that's messy because this is something that's being created by the federal government for the federal government, but owned by private interest and profited on by private interest. And of course, those private interests would be the wealthiest Americans at the time. And then another goal was to raise the tax on whiskey. We'll talk about why. He also wanted to bring about a tariff or a tax on imported goods that we bring into the country. And he proposed that we have a large national army to protect our country. Now, his plan really relied on a strong relationship with Britain, who we just broke away from and who we still had diplomatic problems with. Others, maybe the Democratic Republicans or Anti-Federalists as they were known, they opposed this. They thought that there was money to be made in the West. They didn't really care, these Anti-Federalist or Democratic Republicans, about manufacturing. Remember, those guys are farmers, and they had no desire for major bankers or financiers financiers to control the economy. Like, they were just farming guys. They wanted to keep our country small and relatively simple. So remember, Democratic Republicans, they used to be the anti-federalists. They are agrarian, and agrarian just means like agricultural, which means that they were farmers, and they wanted this country to be consisted of like really small time farmers, guys that just kind of made their money on their own. They believed in free trade. People who were against Hamilton, like, they felt like they believed in free trade, that we should be able to kind of just like buy and sell goods freely. And then here's another problem. So those bonds that we were talking about, these bonds that help to kind of pay our revolutionary soldiers, or that were sold during the war, well, speculators bought them up. And we have to remember what a speculator is. This is somebody that purchased something with the hopes of reselling it. So they purchased those bonds at a massive discount, right? So like, they didn't pay the full cost of the bond. Like, they just kind of gave somebody a little bit of money, and they now have this bond. But now Alexander Hamilton is talking about paying full price for those bonds. So now you have these people within society that are going to benefit heavily from the reselling of bonds. And then another major issue is that because of poor roads, farmers in the backcountry, like, they distilled grain and they turned that grain into whiskey. So good on them. They're entrepreneurs. They're like, dude, we can't carry all this grain. It's just the roads aren't good enough. The waterways aren't, accessible enough. So we're going to turn this grain into whiskey, and we're going to sell it like that. Well, Alexander Hamilton decided to tax that. Like, obviously, like, that would be a great revenue source, but, that's really upsetting to those farmers. And remember, farmers are Democratic Republicans who are not Federalists. So we see a lot of this political party divide. Like, things are getting pretty messy with regards to economic policy and the relationship between, political factions within the government. So how does this plan kind of come through? Well, it comes via a compromise, as we've seen, in the Constitutional Convention. So Jefferson, he got Southerners to accept the plan, Hamilton's plan, but it was in exchange for a capital to be built on the Potomac River between Maryland and Virginia. In other words, Washington, D.C. So in exchange for all of this plan, the South supposedly, was able to get the White House to be built, or the seat of government, the capital of the country to be built in the South, which I don't know that that's a fair exchange. All right, so we saw and learned about the American Revolution. Well, people all around the world were very inspired by that. The idea that you could take power away from a king and literally break away from him like it never happened before. So France does the exact same thing. Like, they have a tax issue in their country. The lower classes rise up against the upper classes. A little bit different. But they take their king out of power, and they kill him. And so at the beginning of this, though, most Americans were inspired by it. Like, they loved it. They were like, okay, American Revolution Part 2. We're doing it again. And then, there started to be a divide, though, because of the class issues in the French Revolution. So Thomas Jefferson and other Democratic Republicans, they believed that even though it was like pretty, dicey, like really intense, this revolution, that it was a victory. Like, this is another instance of democracy winning around the world, and it needed to be defended. Like, Jefferson even helped to write the Declaration of Independence for France. It was called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. But the Federalists, on the other hand, people like Washington and Hamilton and their supporters, they thought that it was the beginnings of anarchy. Like, they thought that it was a really bad thing. And they wanted to be more associated with Britain, who at this point had decided to attack France. So the Federalists did not support the French Revolution after a time. And then also, if you're a Federalist, you are wealthy, you're upper class, like you're upper echelon, whatever. And so the idea that what was happening in France could maybe happen in the Americas, lower classes rising up against the upper classes, they were definitely not going to be supportive of that. So some of our leaders, especially George Washington, they were concerned about this. They felt like that the political parties were being divided even more because of this French Revolution issue, and then eventually the French and British War issue. And we had this alliance, with France from the Revolutionary War up to this point. But that alliance is starting to become shaky because France is kind of treating us like a little brother, and we kind of are. And so, like, in one instance, this guy, Citizen Genet from France, like, he came to the United States to just kind of like get support for France in their war, which we were trying to stay out of. And he just starts taking U.S. ships and using them to attack British ships, using, under the French flag, but he's like using our boats. So that was a really big problem. All right, now the British. What are our problems with these guys? So I think I'm running out of time. I'm gonna see if the timer runs out on me. I'm gonna give it 10 seconds, so I'll slow down. But if it runs out, I'll just start another video. Boom. 3 seconds. Oh, okay, we're still going. So it didn't. All right, I'm with you. All right. So the British, what are our problems with them? Well, they had something called impressment. So the British were kind of like capturing U.S. ships that were trading with the French in the West Indies, which is the Caribbean. And in some instances, they were even capturing sailors, because a lot of these British sailors had defected or quit from the British Navy because it sucked to work for them, and they came to work for, you know, American businesses. And so the British started to like stop our ships and kidnap guys, some of them who had never even worked or were even from Britain. So that was a problem. And then another problem was Jay's Treaty. So remember, the Federalists are in control of our government. And so they decided to make this treaty with Great Britain to kind of, I don't know, hopefully fix some of our issues with them. But this treaty doesn't do any of that. And more than anything, it gives Britain the right to increase their shipping with us, but it doesn't stop impressment. It doesn't get them to remove the forts that they still had on U.S. soil. And it just kind of guaranteed that, you know, that we would be able to trade with them, or that they could trade with us. But this kind of nullifies the American-French alliance that we had, because if we are making treaties with Great Britain and Great Britain has decided to attack France, then France is not really going to be so happy about this connection with Great Britain. And this was really critical. Like, people criticize this, especially the Democratic Republicans, because at the time, and even now maybe a little bit, it didn't really make sense. So the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, we do need to know their characteristics. Remember, you need to know stuff to be successful in this class. And so for the Federalists, like, their characteristics are that they were supporters of Washington and Hamilton's financial plan and closer ties with Great Britain. Remember, they're money guys. They're prosperous merchants. They're really wealthy farmers, lawyers, and political leaders. And they believed in a loose interpretation of the Constitution, which just means that, yes, the Constitution has its language, but they felt that there was like wiggle room, that you could maybe do a little bit more than what the Constitution says. And then on the other hand, you have the Democratic Republicans. Like, these guys are led now by James Madison, who switched over, and Thomas Jefferson. And they're sympathetic to France. Like, they care about France. They don't really care about Britain and our connection with Britain that much. They had more faith in our democratic self-government and our ability to you know, to run our government, and France's ability to do the same thing. And these guys are also wealthy planters, but they're also ordinary farmers too. Remember, the Democratic Republicans are agrarians. They believed in agrarianism. They are farmers. So now there was all these political debates that came up with regards to politics. And at the time, it wasn't typical that your regular, ordinary, everyday guy would be talking about politics. And the Federalists hated it, because remember, that's why they put in the whole, you know, electoral college thing. They felt like that typical everyday Americans weren't capable, or that they didn't deserve to be able to talk about politics at the highest level. And women were even getting involved. There was a lady in England, Mary Wollstonecraft, who advocated for women's rights, and also made connections with women in the United States to do the same. Now, we jump on over to those farmers, right, in Pennsylvania. So these guys that were distilling their extra grain into whiskey, well, they rebelled. They didn't like this tax that had been passed. Again, remember, no taxation without representation. And anytime there's a problem, we rebel. So we had Shays' Rebellion. Now we have the Whiskey Rebellion. But the big difference this time is that we have a constitution where we can implement a military to send out there to go handle the problem. So Washington, George Washington, that is our new president and our new executive office, he sent 13,000 militiamen to Pennsylvania to go handle that. And as soon as, you know, George Washington, and he rides on horseback himself, like he's out there, like really. So when these farmers see that, you know, they're like, okay, let's put our pitchforks down. Like, let's relax. This is pretty serious. And this is a big deal because, you know, the Whiskey Rebellion kind of shows that the federal government is now in control. Like, no longer are we going to allow for these little rebellions to pop up that we can't squash. And so we shut it down, and we're successful in doing so, and that's that. All right, so I think our thing's going to time out here. I'm going to go ahead and move on. We'll talk about George Washington's farewell address, I think, for maybe 10 seconds. Or maybe I'll just let it ride out again. Let's let it breathe. We got 8 seconds. Will it let me go to 15 or will it time out at 15? Who knows? We're still in there. Okay, let's go. So, George Washington, his farewell address. So as George Washington is leaving office, this is really important. He gives a warning, right? And he warns against two big things, right? He says that these political parties, these factions that have grown in government, that they're problematic and they're only going to tear the country apart. And of course, we don't listen to him on that. He also suggested that permanent alliances or entanglements with other countries, that it would also become problematic. So like this connection with Britain, or this desire to be connected with Britain, or this desire to be connected with France, that it was now pulling us into this conflict between Britain and France. And so he said we shouldn't get involved too much in the world's affairs either, that we should kind of stay isolated. But that's a story for another day. So our second president is John Adams, the first John Adams. There's going to be another one. And he won the presidency based on sectional lines. He got most of his votes from the Northeast. This is New England, New York, New Jersey, right? And at the time, the president and the vice president did not run together. So Jefferson wins the vice presidency. So you have a Federalist president with a Democratic Republican vice president. It doesn't make sense. But it happened. So both Britain and France, they started seizing American ships, right? Like, so now France, who's supposedly our ally or whatever, like they're starting to take ships now. So we, in the XYZ affair, we send diplomats to France. Like, we go to talk to these guys about, hey, like, you're stopping our ships, man. Like, we're supposed to be buddies a little bit. We know that we just made Jay's Treaty or whatever, but when we send our officials to France, our officials were met by like some underlings, like some secretaries, and those guys were like, hey, for you to talk to our officials, you have to pay a bribe, right? And so we were so offended by that Adams, he makes this public, and he referred to these guys that met with our officials as Monsieurs X, Y, and Z, right? Like that they were just the nameless, the last letters of the alphabet. They were insignificant. How dare you treat the United States this way? And so we do go to war with France in the quasi-war. It's not really a real war. It's just like a little battle that's waged in the Caribbean down there. But we break our alliance with France. Like, we're no longer cool with them, like, at all. Now, the Federalists, they try to get a little sneaky, yeah? So they realize the country is expanding and the country is growing. And a lot of people, they don't identify with this wealthy political party of financiers and bankers and wealthy planners. Most people identify with the Democratic Republicans because that's the party for the ordinary guy, and most people are ordinary guys. And a lot of immigrants into the country started to identify with the Democratic Republican Party as well. So they added a couple of new laws that were highly controversial for the time. One of them was the Alien Act, or the New Naturalization Act, that extended residency requirements from 5 to 14 years. So for you to become a citizen, it didn't just take 5 years, it took 14, because they wanted to delay the ability of the Democratic Republicans to get new voters. And they also would deport quote unquote dangerous individuals. But really they wanted to deport people who would maybe vote for the Democratic Republicans. And then another act, this is an important word, sedition. Remember, we've seen it before. It just means to speak out negatively against. So they made it illegal for you to speak out negatively against the government. Which is, of course, a violation of your First Amendment rights. So in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, Virginia and Kentucky, two states from the South that were against Federalist policy in general, they attacked the Sedition Acts as unconstitutional. Virginia called on the Supreme Court to put a stop to it. Kentucky supported the idea that states could just nullify or disregard laws of the federal government, and who knows whether that was right or not. All right, so, and that'll come up for us later as well in the course, like nullification. But Thomas Jefferson, he becomes our next president in the year 1800. The 12th Amendment makes it to where, like, the federal electors in the Electoral College, like, they couldn't just funnel both. They got 2 votes. They got a vote for the president and the vice president. Some of those guys were giving both of their votes to the president to try to get their guy into office. And that's how we came up with ended up with these, like, 2 political party, presidencies and vice presidency. So the 12th Amendment required that they cast 1 vote for president and 1 for vice president. Now, the reason that the election of Thomas Jefferson is considered a revolution is because he won. He could not have won without Southern representation, and this was based on slaves being counted as a part of that 3/5 compromise. And he also kind of represented the everyday common guy through his association with the Democratic Republican Party. But those divisions regarding slavery, they are going to begin to grow. Some of it's political, yeah, like Northerners feel like, oh my gosh, like you can't, use slaves to prop up your votes and have your guy get into office. But some of it was really based on Enlightenment ideas, based on this idea that slavery is just wrong or that there should be alternatives for African peoples to be free. And speaking of African peoples, the last thing that we'll talk about today is the Haitian Revolution. So just like France was inspired by the American Revolution, so were the slaves in Haiti. So Haiti was like a really large plantation for France. And it was its most wealthiest plantation, or colony, that was based on sugar plantations down there in the Caribbean. And these slaves had heard all of these stories of American freedom and revolution and then the French Revolution, and they were inspired by it. So they had a leader, Toussaint L'Ouverture, who was an educated slave, and he literally starts this rebellion to push against the French forces that were trying to take over their territory, and they do, and they win, and they are the first and really only successful slave rebellion during this time period. But this does cause concerns for Americans. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, like their slaves revolted. What's to stop the slaves in the southern parts of the United States from revolting? And then Thomas Jefferson, he didn't trust Haiti. Like, nobody did, right? So Jefferson wanted to quote unquote quarantine this new black country to pretty much try to destroy it. So there was no trade relationship for the most part with a lot of the world power, any world power really. And France, to get back at Haiti, put them into this debt. Like, they made Haiti, even though they won this revolution, they made the Haitians pay this really massive and crippling debt that it took forever to pay off. And so when we look at Haiti today, the financial struggles that they're in, a lot of it was really caused by the way that they kind of hit the ground running. If the Haitians had received the same types of support that the American government had received when they did their revolution, then maybe they would have been able to have gotten on their feet a little bit better. But the times are the times, so it's unfortunate. Okay, guys, that's it for today. You have a good one.